So this time around, we're going to be opening up the high score widget and setting that up with our new fonts as well. So I'm going to go to Pinball, and I'm going to go to my blueprints, and once again, I'm just going to open up. This time around, it will be the high score widget rather than the high score entry. Now, the reason for this is this one refers to the menu that we put on both of the screens, whereas this one is just the final screen. So I'm going to go to my high score widget, and I'm just going to set up initially just a heading up top that says high scores, followed by the scores beneath it. Now, we already know that the scores beneath it are actually reasonably okay. So I'm just going to set this up to have its font as the font that we've imported. And I'm going to increase the font size as well, because right now it's reasonably small. So this will look a little bit nicer. So that'll go there, and I'll just quickly test this out. Now, that there represents our next issue. At the moment, it's scaling up such that it ends up in kind of a weird position. You'd have seen how as it expanded, it kind of went in a strange direction, and I'll show you why that's happening. Essentially, what it's doing is, as the text is filling out, this box is scaling itself, but it's scaling itself relative to this position and here. So what I'm going to do is initially let's treat this in isolation. Let's ignore what it's doing in the main menu, and instead copy the score text, hit Shift-Enter, paste, Shift-Enter, paste, Shift-Enter, paste. And we've now got the 4 scores, and we can set that up from here. So I'm going to move this just down a little bit, shift dragging it, and I'm going to quickly add in that last piece of text that will say high scores. So remember to set your justification as middle, remember to set your anchor as the top center, and set the position of the X to 0, which will put it all the way over here, but the alignment to 0.5, which will drag it back again. From here, I'm going to make sure that the font is set to the font that we want. And I'm going to punch up this to be about a size 85 looks good. I'm just going to move it up a little bit. So that's going to be our high scores list. Once again, I'm going to go through and I'm just going to increase the minimum desired width to be something about there. And I'm going to do that on this box as well. I'm going to push this all the way out to the edges just in case. Compile, save. Now if I was to look at this in the main menu, there will be issues, but that's okay. Play. So the issue here is that it's currently positioning itself off. Now the menu itself has been set up correctly, but it's time for us to fix it in the main menu instead. So I'm going to open this up, and I can see that by just putting it there, and putting in an actual amount of text that's similar to what we wanted to have in the end, we can start to see where the headaches are going to be appearing. And that is that at the moment the positioning of itself is kind of based off of some weird elements that we had in there that looked okay initially, but as the item gets larger, it's more obvious that they're broken. What I need to do is I'm going to set the position X to be 0, the alignment 0.5, and now I'm just going to set the position Y to be something around there. And this should now scale reasonably well with the rest of it. We can test this out again, remember, on different screens. So that's correct. That's still correct. Now there may be some things that we would want to do according to the screen resolution, such as adjust the scale, but the positioning isn't enough to actually break any of it. And that's what we care about right now. So that's set up and that's set up. So that seems like it's actually okay now. I'm going to compile, save. Now, what's happening here is that the text that we're inputting actually has one other issue that I didn't account for. And that is that what it's essentially doing is it's adding an extra blank carriage return at the very start of what it does. And you can see what we're essentially getting if I was to do that, which is very close to what we're seeing. So I'm going to have to just go make sure that the function that sets the text, so the get text, which is calculated by generate high score text, that this is correctly doing what it should. And that is that at the moment it gets the old text, it then adds new text, which is equal to the name with a carriage return at the end of it. So essentially when I look at this function, I can see that the mistake that we made was that initially it gets the old text, and when it's the new text, it goes ahead and it adds a carriage return. But that also means that the first time this function runs, it's going to get nothing in the old category because there's no output text yet, and it's going to move everything a line down. And that's okay. That's very easy for us to fix. There's a couple of different ways that we could do this. The simplest is going to be a select node on the output text here. And all I'm going to say, if the array index is the very first index, so if this is the first index, it's going to be name-score. If that's false, it's going to be the composite. Compile save. Now, that's working. So that's working. There's the obvious issue that in what we've done, I'm allowing for characters that go beyond a character length, but that's okay. We can fix that too. So to get that working, all we need to do is go to our high score entry page, and let's correct this and make sure this is all set up nicely as well. So at the moment, this is what the list looks like when this pops up. It's currently asking for text to go in here, and it's giving us a list. I'm going to get this and drag it just to here. I'm also going to now adjust this so that it's something a little bit nicer when we enter the high scores listing. Now there are a few things that we want to adjust while we're in this screen fixing things up. The first is I want to figure out where I want to have this positioned. Actually, you know what? Let's put this up top because that'll be nicer. The next is that I want to make sure this high score text entry is positioned nicely and that it's the correct font. So as they type it in, it actually looks good instead of this kind of ugly font we've got going on at the moment. So to do that, all I need to do is adjust the font in the text entry box itself. So I'm just going to quickly get rid of all of these sections. Under font, I'm just going to set this up as League Gothic. It's a good idea at this point to consider putting in some text that is test text. Now you can see this is what it's doing at the moment, and that's really not very good looking. So let's get this and let's increase the font size as a first step. So after you've kind of adjusted the font, I want you to set the font size to something that's substantially bigger. Let's go with 70. And I'm also going to just drag this, zeroed out the X position so that it would recenter itself. Now the final thing that we have when we're kind of setting up this kind of stuff is I'm going to go and change this initial text to say enter. Okay, I'm just going to empty that out now, actually, now that I think about it. So that's set up. The issue that we have though is that when people first enter this score, they're going to need to effectively click on this with their mouse. So we set that behavior up before, but what I want to do instead is when we go to the high scores screen, I want to set it up so that it auto selects this. And the way I can do that is under graph, under construct. If I get my text entry and I just drag it in, I can now drag off of that and type in the word focus. And you'll see that we have set user focus. And if I get this and I set this to just be get player controller, which gets us, when I get a high score now, it's going to automatically select that. Now, the final thing that I want to do here is I want to make sure that they can't enter more characters than we want to have in a high score. So I need to make sure that that's set up correctly as well. What we're essentially going to do is I'm going to click on here. We're essentially going to set it up so that every time we put in a new letter, it checks to see whether that's over the character count or not. If it is over the character count, which we could set to say 7, 8 characters, it then is going to remove any additional characters in it. So I'm just going to scroll down and you'll see that we have on text changed. So I'm going to click on that. So all we need to do after clicking on the on text changed is to set the text to actually only be a certain character length. So there's a nice function we can do here. If I get text and I convert it to a string, I'm able to actually then do certain operations on it as a string that I couldn't do with standard localizable text. I'm going to drag off of string and I'm going to type in get sub, and you'll notice that we have get substring as a nice little function. And what this does is this gets from one character index to the length that's given to it and returns that. Now what that means is on text change, if I was to say get start index is 0 and length of 7, I'm then able to get the text entry and set the text to be, there it is, set text to be this. And what this is going to do is that any characters that go beyond this length will be truncated, and it will make it equal to just the maximum length. So what you'll see if I set a high score is compile, save, play. So now, as I keep pressing a character, it's not going to allow me to enter anything past that, but I can still delete. Name, count, and it won't let me go past it. So, hit enter, we're back on there, and everything's great. So that's all it takes to force the text to not go beyond a certain character count, and from now on in, we don't really have to worry about that as an issue anywhere else.